That takes us to our keynote speaker, Mr. George Friedman. My colleagues give you a printed document related to the upcoming presentation. Mr. George Friedman is a U.S. geopolitical forecaster and strategist on international affairs. He is the founder and chairman of Geopolitical Futures, an online publication that analyzes and forecasts the course of global events. Prior to founding Geopolitical Futures, Mr. George Friedman was chairman of Stratfor, the private intelligence publishing and consulting firm he founded in 1996. Please welcome Mr. George Friedman, who will be speaking to us on forecasting methods in geopolitics.
It's very complicated to go up on the stage. So, my field is geopolitical forecasting, which is a presumptuous field, because it assumes that there is an order, and assumes that there is a process inherent in the relationship among nations, that this can be understood and in a certain sense predicted. It also therefore has to assume that there is a kind of order between the nation and the society. Because how can there be a predictability of the nation without a logic to the society? Now, this is an enormously difficult philosophical problem because it immediately affects the question of the relationship of free will to determinism. And yet that is the problem we humans always live with. We are completely free, yet we die even when we don't want to. We're completely free, but we're born in whatever place we're born in. We are utterly free, but if I'm born in Burundi, I will probably have a different life than someone born in Hungary. So, modernity has the belief in freedom, not only as a good, but as an empirical reality. As a good, it may be valid. We can discuss the goodness of freedom. As an empirical reality, it's preposterous, because I was born in Hungary. I now live in Texas. And forgetting the question of birth, my life is utterly different in the two places. So when we speak of the lack of determinism, we have to ignore a great deal that is inherently part of our lives. On the one hand, there is Macbeth. Life is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury. Well, that is the idea that events happen, they take place, they have no meaning, they have no order, they have no purpose. They simply take place. But of course Shakespeare didn't say that. Macbeth said that in a moment of great despair. The other position is Thucydides. Thucydides, who analyzed the Peloponnesian Wars and explained why the Spartans were more powerful. And he had a range of good reasons having to do with the nature of their land, the nature of their society, the nature of many things. So there is a tradition of determinism, not the mechanistic determinism of vulgar Marxism, but of a determinism, of a logical flow of life. And as I get older, this is a ridiculous event to happen, but as I get older, I look back and my life has a logic that was completely invisible to me. But I was born on Kozinczuca, and I wound up in the Bronx, and now I live in Texas, and it all appears preposterous, and yet it isn't. What else could it have been? My father was a social democrat in 1949. End of story. And so out of that flows a life. So when we start thinking about society and community, we must begin by thinking about the individual. At the limits of the individual, not the infinite possibilities. How he makes his life as well as he can within the constraints of history, of society, of his talents. So, on the one side there is Macbeth, and the other side there's Adam Smith, the invisible hand. The idea that all of us are engaged in random activities designed to enrich ourselves. And out of that, without our intending it, we create not only an order, but the wealth of nations. So that the subjective intention of the actor and the objective outcome of his actions have very little to do with one another. The entire point of his Wealth of Nations, and please note that it was not a book, How I Can Make $1 Million in 2 Weeks. It was the wealth of nations that he was interested in, how that originated. And his essays on moral sentiment are all about the relationship between subjective perception of what you are doing and the objective reality of what you are forming. Okay? Now, this does not have to be teleological. The problem of Marx was he made it teleological. He said this was not merely an orderly process, but it was going somewhere. And it was going to a place where it solved the human condition. And you would hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, do critical theory in the evening, and all scarcity would be abolished. There is a far cry between Macbeth's despair that there is no meaning and Marx's certainty of an unfolding of history that would lead to an inevitable point. There is no teleology, but there is an ontology. And that ontology is contained in the following phrase: love of one's own. It is an idiosyncratic phrase, love of one's own. But consider it to be the most natural of all loves. I am born to a mother, and she suckles me and raises me, and I love her. I do not need Goethe to explain to me whether this love is worthwhile or not. I know that it's worthwhile. She's my mother. And I grow up not just with my mother, but within communities. And I share those values, and at a certain point I condemn them, because that is the religion of modernity, to condemn that which you love and later regret it. We all have our rituals, and we all think we escape love of one's own, but we don't. Where do we look for the finest explanation of love of one's own? To the Ten Commandments. Honor thy father, thy mother, so thy days shall be long and plentiful. This does not mean you send birthday cards. It means their enemies are your enemies. Their loves are your loves. Their obligations are your obligations. Their lives are your lives. Now, we moderns say, I'm leaving home and I will now have a new life. But that entire concept of leaving home and having a new life itself flows from the culture your parents taught you. Born in another place, another time, it would be unthinkable. It is very important to understand that when we think about the orderliness of history, it begins with the orderliness of life. And it begins with the ontological foundation that we are incapable of not loving that which we were born to. And that, as Andre Malraux said once, we all leave our nations in very national ways. I walk down the streets of Budapest and they don't even ask whether they should call me Hungarian. They speak to me in English, I should say. They know, speak in English. How? I don't know. But we all know when those leave the nation who they are. So, we are trapped in what we were born to. Some of us fight against a trap, Some of our societies create escapes from the trap that only appear to be escapes. Some of them are content with who they are. But these are the lack of options. How can you choose to be other than what you are? How can you choose to be not Hungarian? Now, how do you give that up? How do you give up the language? How do you give up the culture? How do you give up the religion? How do you give up those things? Which are you? What does this have to do with geopolitics? Everything. Because the geopolitics that begins with a map, and that's it, doesn't grasp what's inside the map. To understand geopolitics, you must begin by understanding community. And there are three types of community. There's the community in which we all know each other, the tribe, the entity. Whereas Aristotle's community, where we don't know everybody, but we all know somebody in common, the small town. And the nation state, where most people we don't know. And these are the three, and what has become the most powerful is the nation state. And the nation state itself is enormously complex. I think a piece of paper was sent around, because I didn't want to go through every one of the types of nation state. But there's the single linguistic cultural group with extended history. It's a very fancy way of saying Hungary. There are multiple linguistic cultural groups with variable commitments to the state. That's called the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There are constructed nation states with strong linguistic cultural anchors. The United States. So we have many different sorts of nations. And a geopolitics that does not begin with the type of nation and the dynamic of the nation can't predict its behavior. So if you simply draw a map and say these are three nations and their geographies and this is what we do, it makes no sense. This is why I'm interested in social futuring, a concept which I don't understand at all, but is obviously very valuable. Valuable in the sense that in drawing a geopolitical understanding, I wind up having to delve deep into what the nation is. And unless you can find 10, then you'll probably think of 5 more and criticize 2 of mine. It doesn't matter. The point is that a nation state is like a fingerprint. It is unique. It is different from all others. And the attempt to somehow say it doesn't matter is like saying my finger doesn't matter. You cannot separate yourself from that, and to try to build an entity that simply ignores the obvious necessity of love of one's own. This is where I was born, this is what I was born to, this is who I love, this is who I hate. This is very hard to imagine. Along with the nation is, of course, the state. Because all cities, all tribes, all nations have rulers. And how the rulers are selected and what rights they are and what powers they have, well, this varies from state to state. But there is an idea that rulers can do whatever they want. Trump will destroy America. Well, in America it's hard to destroy it because nobody pays attention. You can only destroy something that matters. So, I mean, but it's important to think of the countries of Putin, of Xi, of Orban, as if they're definitive. It's more complex than that. I think of 3 philosophers, thinkers, to teach me. One is Machiavelli. Machiavelli taught the prince how to be a prince. And in doing that, he said to him, you can't just do anything you want. In writing a book on how to be a prince, he said there are right ways and wrong ways. And if there are right ways and wrong ways, if you do the wrong way, you're destroyed. Do not lift your eyes from war. And if you do it the right way, You'll survive, but then you must do it in a certain way. And then you become predictable. And then you don't have infinite options. And this is a very important teaching of Machiavelli's, because he's really telling us in his lecture on the prince, don't take the prince so seriously. If he's a bad prince, he'll be crushed. And if a good prince, he's going to do what he has to do. Why? Because he became a prince. So, what is the difference between me and Donald Trump? He gets a lot more dates. The difference between me and Donald Trump is he became president and I could never be president. And in becoming a president, you have a certain discipline. You understand your society, and you understand what it demands, and you shape yourself into being what it needs. And in the act of shaping yourself, you lose all that freedom they think you have. What will Donald Trump do? What he has to. And as soon as you say what he has to, he becomes predictable. He ceases to be random. And what Machiavelli is saying, that if you're going to be a ruler, there are certain things you have to do. You have to be feared rather than loved. Trump has certainly done that. Putin has done that. To be feared rather than loved. So you must live in a certain way. And he goes through a whole handbook of what you must do. And by the time, if you do all the things you must do in order to become a prince, you have no freedom. But you live well, and everybody says, sir. The second thinker that I depend on is Hegel. Because he had the notion of the world historical figure. And what is the world historical figure? He is someone who understands what he must do. He understands this moment, and understanding this moment, he understands what he cannot do and what he can do. And why aren't other people world historical figures? Because they don't understand what to do. And why is Napoleon, talks about, a world historical figure? Because he understood everything but not to have General Nye forget the nails. In other words, a world historical figure is not a free actor. He is someone who understands the opportunity that history is presented and aligns himself with it. The third thinker is Adam Smith, who is the great hero of liberal economics. I don't know why, I don't think they've read him. And what he basically says is, look, you go run ahead and make money. The wealth of nation will be assured if you don't even think about it. I don't want you to think about making money of the country. Think of nothing but your own selfishness. The nation will benefit. It is an argument for nationalism and national success. It is not an argument for human liberty, except empirically. He also, on moral sentiment, says and these people should not be thinking about the government because they're thoroughly unsuited to have an opinion. It's much better they should think about something like making money. So liberal economists should really read Adam Smith. He is much more Greek than he appears. But if you look at these three thinkers, they give you an opportunity to think about necessity as the driving force of history. Necessity, not determinism, but the circumstance under which you find yourself in, molding what you do. So in geopolitics, you do not study the leader. If Putin is hit by a car, another Putin comes along with a different name. You study the circumstance under which you find yourself. And in studying the circumstance of one nation, the circumstance of another nation, you begin to understand what they will do. The centrality of this to Hungary is enormous. How much of your life was shaped by World War II? How much of it shaped by the Cold War? And World War II was not unthinkable. Germany was a powerful nation. It was threatened by France. It was threatened by Russia. If both attacked at the same time, he'd be destroyed. So the Germans had to attack somebody first. And they did it twice, exactly the same way. And everybody was surprised each time. And this is what is the extraordinary thing about geopolitics. The constant surprise that the eternal doesn't stay permanent. So, if we look at 1900, Europe was the dominant power of the world. It was peaceful, it was prosperous, it was magnificent. 1920, it was in ruins. Germany, at least we knew, was finished. 1940, Germany was occupying all of Europe. And we knew the war was almost over. 1960, Germany was occupied by the United States and the Soviet Union. And everybody knew there would be a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And that China was the great threat because God knows what they would do. 1980 comes. The United States is defeated in Vietnam, is in ally with China, an enemy of Russia. Everybody knows Russia is rising and the United States is declining. Soviet Union falls, and yada yada. The point is that the common sense of any moment is almost certainly wrong. The one thing that doesn't happen is for generations the same reality plays itself out. So if I could have the slide, which I have no idea how to do. I do have. Yes. Thank you. I want to go to that slide. All right. So I want to give an example because all the abstract discussion doesn't help. There's a line from St. Petersburg to Rostov-on-Don. This is the base of the European peninsula. To the west, no country is more than 400 miles away from the water. Most are 300 miles away. To the east, vastness far away from water, and where there's water, there are choke points. Europe, the European peninsula, is wealthy, a maritime trading power. It's Athens. Russia is hard, difficult life, poverty. Now, how do you hold Russia together? You make speeches? Russia is held together by a powerful central state, money, and the security services. Back to the Okhrana and the Tsar. If you are going to occupy a country this narrow, this wide, this poor transportation, the nature of the regime is definable. What is Russia's primary concern? You look at the map. The Caucasus is the secondary one, because if someone comes into the North Caucasus, a flat run to Moscow. So, Abkhazia, Ossetia, they will hold, no matter what. Dagestan, whichever. It's to the west that the Swedes, the French, the Germans twice came. And why did they survive? Strategic depth. Time. And where was the strategic depth? Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, Ukraine. And which was the most important? Surely Ukraine. So in 2008, I wrote a book, and I said in 2014, I was very lucky, there would be a major crisis in Ukraine. Why? Because the Russians cannot leave Ukraine in the hands of the West. Because take a look, if this is in NATO, how far it is across to Moscow. They can't survive. And they look at the Americans and say, why are you interested in Ukraine? The only reason to be interested in Ukraine is you're planning a war. The Americans weren't planning a war, they were sending Newland around to make speeches. We had no plan. But then we are so powerful and so distant, we don't need a plan. Everybody's trying to figure out what we're doing. Nothing. The great secret when you are a global power living in an island is it doesn't matter what you do. The Russians can't take that chance. So what we have is a crisis over the Ukraine, which is solved by creating a double buffer zone. Why? Because the Americans do have one strategy that they follow consistently for 100 years. Whenever a single power threatens hegemony over Europe, the United States intervenes. When the Tsar fell and the Germans were shifting to the west, the Americans sent 1 million men. When the Germans looked like they were going to dominate, they first let the Russians bleed themselves to death, and then a year before the end of the war, they sent an army. When the Cold War broke out, we said we're tired of sending armies, we'll stay. But there is a single persistent strategy of the United States. So long as Europe is divided, Europe poses no threat. What is the threat that Europe poses to the United States? The foundation of the American security system is the sea. We control the oceans. I won't start saying anything to our Chinese friends, but if you want to get America upset, mess around in the Pacific. You can have all the steel you want. Don't mess the Pacific. The United States has a fixed foreign policy. Then we do stupid things. Iraq, Vietnam, it doesn't matter. This is the fixed policy. So if the Russians approach the Carpathians, if the Russians move in toward the Baltics, if the Russians move toward Poland, we care. So the Russians started playing games. We sent troops to Poland. We sent troops to Romania. Hungary said, no troops, please. All right. I will merely point out that we have troops in Romania, troops in Poland. If you want to go through Hungary, we're going to go through Hungary, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. But the point I'm making here is, American foreign policy is predictable. Because what is the best way to sink a navy? Never let it be built. How do you keep the navy from being built? Have everybody caught up fighting each other. So long as the Europeans are fighting each other and no one wins, we're happy. We love the European Union. Best thing that ever happened to us. We don't want to be in the Eastern Hemisphere. We keep stumbling into it. But the Russian foreign policy is they must have the buffer zone. And they've lost almost all of it. The American strategy is play all you want. We didn't take back Eastern Europe for our health. That we keep. Because if you go back into the middle of Germany, we're back where we started from. So these are the two imperatives that met. Now, from this we can very clearly see now what the real issue is. Belarus. Only that matters. In this great game between the United States and Russia, if there's a pro-Western coup in Belarus, or an NGO comes in to they use the internet, we have NGOs. If an NGO goes in and creates a pro-Western government, that means Smolensk is a border town. If, on the other hand, they take it, that means they have a front against Poland on the North European plain that can't be defended. That means we will come in. So both countries have agreed, ignoring all the noise, and the Ukraine. All right. Russia, we will stay out of it. America, you stay out of it. We have a buffer zone. We're happy, you're happy. Don't mess. And the Americans can't help but a little messing here and there. The Russians will mess a little bit, but not break it. We have a similar understanding in Belarus. Yes, Lukashenko is crazy, but keeps the peace, let them keep the peace, don't bring the armies together. Now, from the understanding that the Russians love their country in the way the Americans love their country, maybe not the same way, but in a certain way, they will respond in a certain predictable fashion, you get order. You can see the history of Russia, what the order is. The buffer states. You can see from the United States what the order is. Making sure that the Eastern Hemisphere does not generate navies. You can see here that a deal is on Ukraine. The Russians are living with the Baltics. But Belarus is the one that can destabilize the whole thing. Okay? So nobody right now is really thinking about Belarus. We think about every bit of news out of Belarus every day. Because both sides have to be thinking. Maybe we can make the move, maybe we can't. And there's an uncertainty principle built into geopolitics. Somebody tries, succeeds, and shouldn't have succeeded. As the United States in Ukraine, it was really not necessary. But we could afford it. So, if you take this view, just in this little case, there's order to it. There's predictability to it. And if you take a look at Putin's obvious stance, he is the more aggressive player at this moment. Where will he play? Ukraine is too big to send a force in. Belarus. And where did he hold his big maneuvers? Just outside of Belarus. Trying to demonstrate or find out if his forces are any better than they were 2 years ago. And the answer is they're very good forces. They just don't know how to take oil and get it to the tanks. Aside from this small problem, my point here is, if we begin with a philosophical understanding of necessity, if we don't immediately leap to this map, but we begin to thinking about what is the ontological nature of the relationship between nations, where does it flow from? And we identify that flow somewhere like love of one's own, or in the way you live and die, or where you're born, and you say, all right, we see the necessity. From the moment of birth, there is a necessity in individual life. And we read Adam Smith, he says, yes, all these individual lives have a necessity, but it's not what they think it is. It goes there. Then you can begin creating a structure of geopolitical behavior. Because nations are conglomerations of human beings, just a polis or a tribe. They have basic necessities and basic rules. And the relationship between nations is no more unpredictable than a really ugly person like me getting a good-looking wife. It's not going to happen. Hi. So, where we go is that it is not certain, it is not clear, but the world from the standpoint of Macbeth makes no sense. It isn't how it is. So when we think about forecasting this, or social futurism, we're not looking at perfection. We are, however, taking notice of the fact that life is not nearly as random as it appears, and facing a fact which is difficult and painful for modernity to accept. You really don't have so many choices. You do not craft your life in any way you wish. Your life is crafted for you at birth, and maybe somewhere in the margins you can go in a different way. Or as André Malraux said, people leave their nations in very national ways. You cannot escape who you are. So, if you look at Thucydides, and not at the philosophy of the Greeks, you see in Thucydides the birth of the concept of necessity, of logic, of the idea that these two nations will fight because of who they are. It will come out like this. It did come out like this. An explanation after the fact, yes, but also a lesson to us. So in this case, there are the Spartans in the east, the Athenians in the west, and the Athenians love their culture, their beauty, their art, and everything else, and they can take casualties. And so history has been written for the past century on that basis. So, on that I will stop and try to urge you to see the order that's there and not translate it into teleological order. It is not the novo ordum secundorum. It is not the new order of the age, although I love Jefferson. Okay? It is not the new order of the age. It's the most ancient order of all, love of one's own.